For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to Strat News Global, and welcome to Books Corner on Strat News Global. I am Surya Gangadharan, and this time on Books Corner, I have with me an old friend and colleague from our days in television, Manoj Kewalramani. He's a researcher on China at the Takshashila Institution in Bengaluru. In fact, he's lived and worked in China as a journalist working for CGTN, and he knows a bit of Mandarin, enough to get by. And this is his first book, Smokeless War, China's Quest for Geopolitical Dominance. So Manoj, congratulations and welcome.
Thank you so much, Surya. Pleasure to be here.
Manoj, you lived and worked in China, so you have a rough idea of how they think and how they, give us some idea about your reading of the Chinese.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tricky to sort of make a comment about knowing how they think. But I just sort of let me just give you a little bit of what I've done and how I've approached this book to be able to understand what's happening in China. Firstly, I've sort of had an engagement with the country for nearly 15 years now, on and off. And sort of my family's had export businesses through China for a very long time. I myself spent about 5.5 years living in the mainland, traveling there for the first 2 odd years and working as a trader. And then spending 3 years with CGTN, which was a tremendous experience because it was a time when Xi Jinping had just taken charge in late 2013. I got to Beijing in June 2013. And I think I remember my first week at CGTN was the Sunnyland Summit between Obama and Xi Jinping. And you were seeing something new evolve in China. And over the next 3 years that I worked with that organization, I could sense how the environment in the country was changing, and what we today see as consolidation of power by Xi Jinping, how that was playing out, how the media was reacting to it. I lived through the experience of CGTN's coverage of the first sort of Hong Kong protest, the umbrella movement in 2014. And all of that was really, really interesting to observe. At the same time, I played a role in CGTN's development of its digital infrastructure, which today, sort of, when I track China's discourse power, it sort of gives me a sense of a first-hand view of how certain decisions were taken, how certain decisions are taken even today, and sort of gives you an insight into that. In terms of how they think, and at least when I say they, I mean the leadership, my approach is essentially to try and look at what the leadership is telling itself and the cadre, along with what the leadership is obviously telling society in China. And of course, look at the actions in terms of what policies are being adopted and what's being done. Because there is often a chasm between discourse and actual action. But it's important to track discourse, particularly with regard to what are the guidelines, what are the regulations that are being issued with regard to the party's organization, with regard to the party's actions at all different levels, with regard to cadre management, with regard to how cadre is being assessed, and what are the parameters that are being changed in that. Because we need to realize that this is a 90+ million strong party, and secrecy can only be to that degree, because if you need the diktats of the leadership and if you need the organizational structure to sustain and to persist with whatever is the design of the top leadership, you need to put that in public. That's how people are going to eventually follow it. You can't do that secretly. And these sort of going through these sort of official statements, official regulations, give you a window into how the party is developing and how it's evolving. I look at a lot of domestic narrative with regard to commentaries being written by Chinese experts, Chinese analysts. Some of them are closer to the dispensation in power right now. Some of them may not be as close. Yet where they have written, what they have written, what sort of analogies they have leveraged, at what time period they are choosing to make what sort of comment, all of that sort of plays a role in unpacking what's going on within the party. So I can't say with certainty that, of course, I know what's going on within Xi Jinping's head or
Yeah.
within the top leadership because of the opacity of the system. But if you sort of look at all of this and you do it on a regular basis consistently, it gives you a fair sense of the direction in which the party wants to move. And it also tells you a little bit about the push and pull that's going on within the party. Because at a certain point of time, a certain phrase may come back. At a certain point of time, a certain leader may be invoked. Just in the last couple of weeks, the People's Daily has talked about, there's a long article about the use of the phrase peaceful development, something that generally has been there, but it's been downplayed. But the fact that it's prominently suddenly featured tells you a little bit about, and it just comes after a few days of Xi Jinping saying we need to create a lovable image of China.
Yeah.
So it tells you a little bit about what motivations are driving. Now, it's not certain, of course, that suddenly the narrative is going to change completely,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
tells you a little bit about what incentives are at play. Likewise, again, a couple of weeks ago, we had one of the People's Daily's pieces eulogizing Zhou Enlai's diplomacy and how he created a friendly external environment, which again is fascinating given all the criticism that Wolf Warrior diplomacy is getting. So you can
Manoj,
see and pick up strands of thought.
Manoj, I want to come to your book straight away. Smokeless War, China's quest for geopolitical dominance. That's a big, heavy title and also very dense. And there's been a lot of books on China in the last couple of years. What is the story you're telling?
Right. So fundamentally, what I'm doing is, and as the title sort of tells you, that the title is about, the idea of the smokeless war comes from, again, propaganda within China with regard to its effort to contain COVID-19. This was a wartime effort even in China. In fact, they were the first to sort of call it a wartime effort. Xi Jinping termed it as a people's war. Subsequently, the phrase a war without smoke or then smokeless war came into being with the idea that this is a war, but there are no guns and smoke. And I've taken that to sort of adapt it to the idea of this was just beyond healthcare and containment to that degree. This was also about competing for narrative, competing for legitimacy, and competing for a systemic superiority with regard to the rest of the world. That's how it eventually evolved with regard to the US in particular. And that's where the sort of title talks about. So it's a story about China in 2020. I've tried to document how the Communist Party of China responded to the medical emergency, the political dynamics of the pandemic, the economic dynamic of the fallout of these shutdowns that we've seen, and its discourse responses to the sort of contestation that went on throughout the last year. It's partly a journalistic effort, it's partly an academic effort, and it's partly an analytical effort. The journalistic component comes from trying to document what's happening and to try and talk about the different sides of the story. The academic effort comes from the point of drawing on the work of tremendous number of people whom I deeply admire, from Maria Repnikova, Deborah Stone, Curtin Zhao, lots and lots of different analysts and academics who told us so much and who've sort of framed our understanding of political life in China. So to draw on their frameworks to try and give a assessment of what's happening in the country. And the analytical effort sort of comes from the point of looking at the fallout of what's happened from the broader sort of geopolitical dynamics point of view, to look at what's happened with regard to the discourse on human rights, to the discourse on systemic competition with the West, to the discourse on how the Chinese Communist Party is going to project itself in the future, to the discourse on supply chains, and to try and present a sense of what you can expect down the road in the coming years. So this year, coming years, what sort of, how the last year, how 2020 has shaped the next 5, 7, 10 years and the context that we're going to see over that period. So that's the effort, and that's the story that I'm telling.
I was reading your initial chapters where Xi Jinping talks about telling China's story well, disseminating it well, strengthen our discourse power internationally. I mean, is that what we are seeing today in all the kind of wolf warrior diplomacy that's going on?
I think we are. I mean, I think when you look at what Xi Jinping is talking about when he says, not just about strengthening China's discourse power, but I mean, how do you strengthen discourse power? Part of that lies at home, where you need to cultivate those sources of power. One of the primary sources that you need to cultivate is domestic legitimacy. And you're seeing that effort go into cultivating that. So when you look at it domestically and you look at the narrative that the Chinese Communist Party has talked about at home throughout the pandemic and even today, it's essentially about how it's managed to contain what was a sudden outbreak, which was unknown to anybody in the world. And it's managed to contain that effectively, and it's managed to do that because of its, because of the nature of the party, its top-down control, because of leadership of Xi Jinping, because of the institutional strength of the party and the party system, where it was able to deploy these millions of cadre at the grassroots level to be able to impose these very strict lockdowns, to be able to organize society, carry out testing, and then subsequently at the same time draw all these resources to be able to create those hospitals that we saw in Wuhan, to be able to use technology to then develop vaccines and the rest of it. In that sense, it has managed to do a really good job at home. The legitimacy that the system enjoys at home today, I would say, is really, really significant. And in the book, I document some surveys which suggest that the system's legitimacy has significantly gone up. At the same time, when we see internationally, yes, as an effect, I think that there has been a challenge because in the West, there has been a pushback with regard to how the Chinese diplomacy has operated, how this need to cultivate discourse power and how they've used discourse power has operated. But again, if you see the sources of that discourse power that they've cultivated, you go from Chinese investments in media, across the world. You look at Chinese use of foreign experts and people and foreigners to be able to tell their story. You look at the United Front activity, where you are cultivating elites in other countries through use of financial means, through use of loans and projects, through party-to-party relationships. You look at the ability of the Chinese party-state media to innovate, to tell stories differently, to not just stick to those very dogmatic dialectical dialogue about Marxism and materialism, but to actually innovate and create things which are exciting to watch. The documentaries that have been created around the pandemic have been really high quality. And I talk about that in the book, where I talk about the idea of Hollywoodification of propaganda in China. The book that they released on their sort of narrative of Wuhan, which was released in February last year, and I quote some of the stories from there. They give you a real sense of a movie that's playing out in front of your eyes, and it's not your dry, boring, run-of-the-mill communist propaganda. And I think along with that sort of adaptability to new media, again in the book I document that particular People's Daily graphic of the Statue of Liberty, the facade falling off with a police officer stepping out from it, armed police officer crushing the White House, and the skull of a African American man. That sort of ability to be able to create these new tools and to use them are the sort of things that they have sought to cultivate. What has been the outcome of that? I think it's a little mixed.
Okay. I want to ask you, you mentioned Xi Jinping's credibility has gone up. Now tell me, in very succinct terms, has he been able to consolidate, increase his power through this pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, I would agree. I think today Xi Jinping enjoys unparalleled power in the Chinese system. There is an incredible effort underway to position him akin to Mao. And I think, if you ask a historian, they would tell you, look, while this narrative of Xi Jinping being as strong as Mao or having power equivalent to what Mao once enjoyed is fair enough, but, Deng Xiaoping enjoyed tremendous power. It's just that he wielded it very differently. But irrespective of that sort of argument, I do think that Xi Jinping today enjoys unparalleled power. And as long as he is around, I don't see him being seriously challenged. He's at a different level today, and as long as he's around, I don't see him being challenged. This was evident through the pandemic. He cracked down very severely on any critics. He also launched what was a rectification campaign, which there was a pilot version last year. This year, we have a countrywide version that's currently ongoing. In fact, just last week, there was data on the nature of that rectification campaign targeting the security and legal apparatus. And over the last year, lots of police chiefs across China have been booked for corruption. And corruption is political in China. It's not just economical. It's not just graft. So, lots of them have been booked. So the system is sort of being whipped into line. And I see this continuing down to 2022 October, which is when we see the 20th Party Congress. I can't say with any certainty whether Xi Jinping will remain General Secretary, but I think that his authority won't be diminished.
Okay. So you're saying his authority is rock solid. Is that what you're saying?
Indeed,
There's
I
a
think his authority is rock solid.
But you have a caveat that next year things may not be the same. So why do you say that?
No, my caveat is not that. What I'm saying is that he may not continue as General Secretary, but that decision, whether he continues as General Secretary or not, will be immaterial in the context of his authority. I think he will continue to enjoy unparalleled authority. Whatever he does next year, whether he continues as General Secretary, although there is no law which stops him from not taking a third term as General Secretary. But he may choose to abide by the norms. We don't know that at the moment. I don't think he will. I think he will continue as General Secretary. But in case he doesn't continue as General Secretary, I don't think anybody should see that and say that is a reflection of diminished authority. I think his authority remains rock solid, and I think it remains unparalleled in the system.
I want to look at the economy. Lots of reports that China is doing very well. Trade figures are going up. What's your reading?
I think, look, last year when they sort of, the first things first, I mean, to give the devil its due, I think they did a tremendous job restarting the economy. I think if you, and I document this in the book again, if you go through week by week, which is what I've tried to document through March and April and subsequently, there was a clearly thought out approach of creating micro containment zones, but letting the rest of the economy begin and to start as much as possible, to infuse money as early as possible, and to make sure that that money goes to where it's supposed to go. And I think they did a fairly good job in trying to do that. The outcome of that was that you saw a tremendous supply side recovery and a fairly robust supply side recovery. You can, and again, I mentioned this in the book, there were reports about, local officials fudging data with regard to electricity usage and so on, which are parameters based on which you would see how the economy is reacting. And that's all fair. You will see data being fudged, but I don't think you can fake children going back to school early. I don't think you can fake people going back to the box office. I don't think you can fake those things, right? So I do think that there has been a tremendous supply side recovery. And that's where the challenge lies. That's what the Chinese have been good at. They've been good at investment-driven growth. They've been good at supply-side recoveries. But that was one of Xi Jinping's big reform agenda, which was to, whip the supply side into shape and make the economy more demand and consumption-driven. That is a long-term challenge that is going to persist. What's also going to persist is debt as a challenge. Xi Jinping's 3 systemic risks that he wanted to address in 2017, at the top of that was financial risk. And there was some effort to sort of curtail financial risk, with shadow banking being, trimmed down by some $3 trillion. So there was some effort that had been done. But last year sort of stopped all of that. And you again saw state-led investment. The hope that they have is that this investment will go into much more productive uses than we saw in the past. So there won't be your boondoggle infrastructure projects of roads to nowhere, statues that do nothing, or, cities where there's nobody living. But you're actually investing in far more productive areas such as digital infrastructure, 5G technology, and so on and so forth. How much of an impact that will have, time will tell. But I think their direction is that. So you're going to see far more state-driven investment growth. I don't think you're going to see an immediate bounce back in demand. And I think current figures also tell us that the demand is a big challenge for them. And if how the debt issue is managed is going to be significant. Because we've seen a number of defaults in the last 6-8 months. I think my fear is that those defaults will continue. And that's a push and pull between the state and companies and banks with regard to getting discipline in the system. And I think that's going to continue. So we're going to see that challenge play out consistently. From the state's point of view and from the party's point of view, the issue is systemic risk. You don't want to see the banking system go through a contagion of problems. The last point on the economy that I will make is employment. That was the earliest focus of Li Keqiang. Starting from March, his view was, let everything else go to hell, let the employment issue be addressed first. because that's linked to social stability.
Yeah.
And I think that's still a challenge for them. That's still a huge challenge for them with anecdotal and anecdotal data and reportage from China even today telling us that more people are gravitating towards state enterprises and government jobs because of the uncertainty, which tells you that while the economy has recovered, there's still a long way to go.
Yeah. Last question, Manoj. On the question of foreign policy. Now, we've seen a certain profile of China over the last couple of years. Would you care to make any projections or predictions as to the direction and the content and the tone of foreign policy over the course of the next year or so?
Yeah, I mean, look, my view is very straightforward. It's that we're not going to see any dramatic changes in China's foreign policy. We are not going to see Xi Jinping look at the G7 or look at the world and say that, oh, look, the external environment is much more challenging and I need to take a U-turn. I don't think we're going to see that. I don't think we're going to see Xi Jinping go back to Deng Xiaoping's hide your strength and bide your time. I think he's very clear. I think he has tremendous amount of confidence in the Chinese system, and he's saying that. He has tremendous amount of confidence in the Chinese government and the party's ability to compete in that system and to carve a place for itself and to take much more authority and responsibility that it feels it deserves. And I think you're going to see, therefore, much more contestation. From day to day, what you're going to see is that the Chinese government also, and the party says this quite clearly, that they also see the world sort of in a place of flux, where the balance of power is shifting from the west to the east. There is a undermining of the Western-led order, and the Chinese would call this greater democratization of the global order, and therefore they see greater space for themselves, and they also see the opportunity for their economic might to make them an indispensable partner for others, which again tells you that you're not going to see them sort of go back to what you saw maybe 10 years ago. Just last year, and I show this in the book, where when Xi Jinping was meeting with Angela Merkel and other European leaders, and they talked to him about human rights. This is when they were finalizing that European investment agreement. When they were meeting with them, they talked about human rights, and Xi Jinping was blunt in saying, we don't need an instructor in the West on human rights. And since then, we've seen greater contestation irrespective of the cost. While this EU treaty is, the agreement is on ice right now, we've seen both sides impose sanctions. We've seen the Chinese come up with a new anti-sanctions law last week. So I don't see any backtracking. And I think with regard to India also, I don't see any backtracking. I don't see any reset. Will there be reassessments? Do the Chinese want the Indians as their enemies? Of course not. We are on the border. We are important for stability even from their point of view. And we are powerful enough to sort of create problems in their eyes. And I think that's what they're aware of. But that doesn't mean that they won't be competing with us much more vigorously. It won't be the China of 5 years ago. And from an Indian point of view also, I think we're going to see a far more difficult, volatile relationship as China continues to assert itself. And it feels that it has the right to do so. So we're going to not see any change or any sort of softening at all.
So interesting, Manoj. We're going to see China more or less on the same track as we've seen over the course of the last year or so. And things are going to possibly get more difficult with India, given the state of our economy and the general chaos in our political system. Manoj Kewalramani, thanks very much. Pleasure talking to you. And I would recommend all of you to go and read this book. In fact, I started reading from behind because it's more current from the end. This is a tactic I found a way to get around and read more books. So do check out Manoj Kewalramani's book. Thanks very much, Manoj. Pleasure talking to you. And let's hope we get good sales over there.
Thank you so much, Surya. Pleasure talking to you. Thank you for having me.
That's all we have now on Books Corner. So keep tracking us on social media, Twitter and Instagram, and keep following us. Give us your comments, observations. You're always welcome. Thank you.